The opening scene introduces John Brickner, a man recently released from prison after serving 4 years, a shorter term than the 7 years he was sentenced to for a past murder. Determined to make amends and rebuild his life, John moves to Seattle, where he starts working as a construction laborer in search of stability. One evening on his way to a bar, he happens upon Frankie, a waitress, being harassed by 3 men. John couldn't stand by and decided to teach the 3 men a lesson. He swiftly stepped in, restrained one of them, and forced the troublemaker to apologize to Frankie. Faced with John's strength and resolute demeanor, all 3 men panicked and quickly fled the bar. Impressed by John's actions, the bar owner immediately offered him a job as a security guard. John accepted, embarking on a busy life with 2 jobs, working as a construction laborer during the day and a bar security guard at night. The next day, John started his new role as a security guard at the bar. When 2 drunken patrons got into a fight, he stepped in to mediate. However, they soon caused trouble again, forcing John to take action and subdue both, ultimately making them leave. While watching the entire scene unfold was Reno Paul Saint, Frankie's boyfriend. Impressed by John's skills, Reno offered him another job opportunity, leaving his business card and asking John to get in touch if he was interested. John politely declined Reno's offer, as he was already juggling 2 jobs. One day, after finishing his construction shift, he was unexpectedly approached by a woman named Veronica. To his shock, Veronica was the wife of the man John had killed in the past. She was also the one who had submitted the petition that secured his reduced sentence and early release from prison. However, her assistance came with a price. Veronica demanded that John raise $250,000 to cover the cost of a life-saving heart transplant for her daughter. Determined to make amends, John resolved to help Veronica raise the money needed for her daughter's life-saving surgery. Back home, he checked all the money he had, but the meager amount was nowhere near the staggering sum Veronica demanded. Feeling cornered, John sought Frankie's help. She agreed and led him to meet Reno at a secret location. Upon arrival, Reno guided John into a bustling building. Inside was a lively arena, where the crowd roared in excitement, cheering for the fighters in the ring. After hearing John mention his struggle to earn money, Reno revealed his true intentions. He wanted John to become a fighter under his management. Each victory would bring a substantial reward from the betting pool. Despite being on parole, John firmly refused to participate in illegal fights, standing his ground against Reno's coercion. Unwavering in his decision, he refused to compromise. The next day, John visited Veronica to apologize for being unable to raise the money she desperately needed. Hearing this, Veronica reminded John of the promise he made while in prison. Back then, he had vowed to do whatever it took to make amends for his past wrongs. Veronica's shouting caught the attention of her daughter Sarah. The frail and ailing girl stepped out of her room to see what was happening. Seeing Sarah in such a weakened state, John felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and guilt. Finally, he promised Veronica he would do whatever it took to raise the money for Sarah's treatment. The next morning, while John was working at the construction site, he was unexpectedly fired by his boss for a small, avoidable mistake. However, just a few minutes later, his boss suddenly suffered a heart attack and collapsed right in front of John. Fortunately, with quick reflexes, John administered first aid in time, helping him survive the critical situation. That evening, John decided to return to the arena to observe the situation. There, he saw Reno and Frankie intently watching an intense match. Unfortunately, Reno's fighter was severely injured during the fight and was immediately rushed for emergency treatment to a nearby room. After the examination, the doctor confirmed that the fighter was not fit to continue the match in the upcoming second round. Faced with this, John voluntarily offered to replace the fighter and continue the fight. However, before John's match could even begin, it was interrupted by the appearance of Mr. Wolf, who came to collect a debt from Reno. Reno quickly tried to reassure him, promising to pay the full amount once the match was over. When the match finally began, both John and his opponent relentlessly threw powerful punches and kicks. The crowd cheered wildly, encouraging both fighters, creating a tense and electric atmosphere that lasted until the first round ended. In the next round, the fighters were allowed to use weapons, and John's opponent quickly grabbed an iron rod, launching a fierce attack. Despite taking a hit, John stood his ground, using his strength and skill to counter. Ultimately, he managed to defeat his opponent with his bare hands, earning a spectacular victory that brought the entire arena to its feet. After the match, in the locker room, Reno handed John a well-deserved reward for his efforts. However, John chose to share part of the money with the fighter he had replaced. A few days later, just as John finished his morning run, he was surprised to see Reno and Frankie approaching him. Reno urged John to take on another fight, emphasizing the large sum of money still up for grabs. After some consideration, John agreed. To make training and preparation more convenient, Reno even invited John to move in with him. Before the next fight, Reno and John met with Deacon, the referee overseeing the match, at a restaurant to discuss the requirements for the upcoming battle. During the conversation, Reno admitted that he was bankrupt and couldn't afford the hefty wager required for the fight. Another obstacle was that John's amnesty status had not been fully resolved. However, after a tense negotiation, John managed to convince Deacon to allow him to participate in the upcoming fight. Shortly afterward, Reno was seen pawning a family heirloom, a priceless ring passed down from his late father, a legendary fighter. The ring now served as collateral for the upcoming match. Later, Reno took John to meet a man named Nestor. However, upon their arrival, Nestor unexpectedly ordered his men to kill Reno for failing to repay his overdue debt. Sensing the urgency of the situation, John immediately stepped in, stopping Nestor's men before they could act. With a firm voice, he declared that he would fight them under one condition: if he won, Nestor must release Reno. If he lost, he would take on Reno's entire debt. After some negotiation, a match was set with a $10,000 wager. Within just 10 minutes, John dominated his opponents, delivering powerful punches and kicks that left them unable to continue, securing a decisive victory. In just moments, John's opponent fell, and victory was his. Without hesitation, John and Reno left the place immediately. On their way back, John received an unexpected call from Veronica, informing him that her daughter, Sarah, had suddenly collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Seeing Sarah lying weakly in the hospital bed filled John with deep concern. He resolved to do whatever it took to ensure Sarah received her surgery in time. After leaving the hospital, while passing by the living room, John accidentally overheard a conversation between Reno and Frankie. Frankie criticized Reno, accusing him of using John to pay off his debts. However, Reno firmly denied the accusation, asserting that John, a former prisoner, was not the person Frankie thought he was. Reno even went as far as to suggest that Frankie might be developing feelings for John. Just then, John entered the room, interrupting their conversation. That night, as John was preparing for another fight, Reno apologized for his earlier words. As time passed, John continued to win in the intense matches, but the money he earned still wasn't enough to qualify for a fight with the current champion. John's name was becoming more and more well-known, causing the courage of other fighters to gradually fade. Many matches had been scheduled but were cancelled because opponents were afraid to face John. However, Reno thought this was understandable and promised to find a worthy opponent for John. One day, when John stopped by a bar for a drink, he noticed two people watching him from inside a car. It turned out they were bodyguards of Veltz, a mob boss who had loaned money to Reno. While Reno was gambling elsewhere, Veltz's men approached him, and Reno begged for more time to pay off his debt. Veltz's men gave Reno a week to repay his debt, warning him that if he failed, Frankie would suffer at their hands. One night, John faced off against a Mexican fighter in an incredibly intense match. Despite the fierce competition, John triumphed, defeating his opponent with impressive skill. After the fight, John, Reno, and Frankie went to a bar to celebrate the victory. While there, John asked Reno why he hadn't been more strategic in arranging his match. Reno explained that as John's reputation grew, the stakes in the matches increased, forcing them to keep fighting in order to earn enough money to cover expenses. Shortly after, John received a call from Veronica, and they immediately went to her house. Upon arrival, John found Veronica unconscious and discovered a letter revealing the cancellation of Sarah's organ donation procedure. Veronica had been so desperate that she decided to take her own life. Without hesitation, John rushed Veronica to the hospital. While waiting at the hospital, John explained to Frankie why he decided to participate in the matches. All John did was to save a child whose father he had accidentally killed. Shortly after hearing that Veronica had regained consciousness, John immediately went to visit her. There he explained that he was trying to earn money to help her daughter undergo surgery. Meanwhile, Reno went to the pawn shop to retrieve his father's ring. However, when he arrived, he discovered that the ring had been sold to someone else for a much higher price because he had arrived too late. Reno was furious but powerless in this situation, unable to do anything to get the ring back. One night, John faced off against Nestor's men once again. After that event, Reno, and fearing that he might seriously harm his opponent, John decided to withdraw. As a result, Nestor claimed victory. At the same time, Veltz's men arrived to find Reno and brutally beat him for the delayed payment of his debt. The next morning, John was once again followed by Veltz's men. They ordered him to come with them and took him to a luxurious mansion. There, John met Veltz, the father-in-law of John's boss at the construction site. To repay John for saving his son-in-law during a heart attack, Veltz promised to do whatever John asked. John immediately made two demands, the first being that the $150,000 would be used for Sarah's heart surgery. John's second request was for Veltz to pay off all of Reno's debts. However, Veltz agreed to fulfill only one of the two requests, and the final decision was left to John. John chose to clear Reno's debts. After the meeting with Veltz, John decided to say goodbye to Reno and Frankie, as he wanted to leave Reno's house. Reno expressed his deep gratitude to John for helping him free himself from the burden of debt. Soon after, Reno received word that someone had placed a bet for John to fight against Sharp, the reigning champion. That night, John arrived at the arena to face Sharp, a formidable opponent who few could defeat. As the match began, John raised his hand to the crowd, and applause erupted, accompanied by lively music. Meanwhile, Veronica rushed down the hospital hallway and discovered that Sarah's surgery fees had been paid. John also arrived at the hospital to comfort Veronica, who was deeply grateful for his help. Soon after, Reno and Frankie arrived as well, and John returned the rings he had bought from the pawn shop. Reno thanked John for his continued support throughout the ordeal.